Good afternoon, boys and girls, and welcome to the biggest little soccer podcast on YouTube. It is the American Hotspur here on Stateside Footy. Of course, I'm your host, Steve Silver, and joining me today is a returning guest. And again, it was actually quite nice considering the schedule this man keeps. He was able to take some time today, and of course, from the Whistle Blows podcast here on YouTube, and of course, Change for Tottenham. It is none other than Billie T. Good afternoon, Billy. I hope you're doing well today.
Yeah, I mean, not much to talk about today, so I don't know how we're going to fit anything in.
Nah. We're just going to wing it.
I mean, I was on about 2-3 weeks ago now, wasn't it? And how so much stuff has happened in that 2-3 weeks? Crazy. What a roller coaster that has been. And I mean, looking forward to getting into it today. Just crazy day as always.
Yeah, and you know what? I will say that it was a slow burn to get to this point. And it's interesting because it was a full circle moment, right? Because it was laced with heavy irony as well, too, considering that our former co-director of football wanted Thomas Frank replaced with the guy that eventually took the interim job way back in November. And it seems kind of interesting that a guy like Johan Lang would actually circle back to a guy like Igor Tudor. But we're going to get into that in just a second. Before we begin, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and also hit the notification bell as well, too, so you don't miss out on any upcoming Stateside Footy content. All right, let's get into it, Billy, because today Igor Tudor was named as interim head coach between now and the rest of the season. And here's the thing, Billy. I think I've made it very clear on multiple occasions that I don't rate Johan Lang, and I certainly don't rate Vinny Van Contesham. Me personally, just like Thomas Frank, I think they're in well over their head when it comes to stabilizing a club like Tottenham Hotspur. But that being said, credit where credit's due, because you can understand why a guy like Fabio Paratici was right about Igor Tudor. Now, granted, as a long-term replacement, probably not. But when you can look at his CV and you look at the fact that he has been in a relegation battle before, rescuing Udinese from the drop in Serie A, and when you kind of look at some of the things that he was able to do, you can understand why a guy like Fabio Paratici rates a guy like Igor Tudor. But also what I like about Tudor is, number one, he's a man manager. He's the type of guy that will be able to give confidence to some of our players. And I think that right now, with confidence and morale at an all-time low, I think that's going to be very beneficial. But also from his, when it comes to tactics, he plays a brand of front-footed football that I think fits the player profile of this squad. And if you remember back to how the squad was put together, in the profile in which a guy like Ange Postecoglou likes to play, which is high pressing, move the ball quickly, get into good spots to score goals, this kind of seems to fit the bill, when it comes to attacking acumen. So here's the thing. I will give credit where credit's due. I'm actually okay with Igor Tudor's, this club in Tudor's hands between now and the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think I agree. I was a little bit. I put a tweet out this morning when the news broke, and the news broke from the Italian journos first, and then soon the big hitters like Ornstein and Fabio Fabrizio Romano got involved, and then that's when you sort of knew that it was real. So I put a tweet out saying, I don't know anything about Igor Tudor. What can you guys tell me? And the response was quite negative at first. I think a lot of people were pointing back to his Juventus spell where he got sacked after going winless in 8 games. But then I think got a bit more information about it, and people were talking about his style of play, and he seems particularly sort of almost like a specialist interim coach, doesn't he? He seems to like going places for a short period of time. And when you look at it through that lens, I don't think anyone's expecting him to be the manager next season. I think we're in a situation where we just have to muddle through and survive now. It's probably makes a lot of sense, and I think I think the problem with this appointment is, as I said this week, is if it goes wrong, we could actually get relegated, which is a very scary place to be. So they had to get this right, and I think they were obviously drawing on his experience. He's been there before. He kept clubs up, and I think that's the thing which they have been drawn to. And let's hope that it works out.
Yeah, I will say that, in a vacuum, guys like Roberto De Zerbi, Xabi Alonso, Xavi Hernandez, and some of the names that I think a lot of Spurs fans wanted, you have to understand that considering where we're at injury wise and the fact that the entire squad is decimated, considering our points total, where we're at in the table, I think it was unrealistic that those guys were going to come at this stage. And so from that standpoint, the pool was pretty small, I would assume, to appoint an interim manager. I think really when it came down to it, it was guys like Tim Sherwood or guys like, Harry Redknapp, if you wanted to roll the dice on a Tottenham guy, or an in-house appointment like just John Heitinga. And I think from that standpoint, you can understand exactly why they decided to go outside the club. And here's the thing: if I take a step back and I look at it without the emotion, I can understand exactly why they wanted to do it. And it seems like, and again, I don't have firsthand knowledge about this, but it really does seem that they're actually taking this relegation scrap seriously. I think they realized as soon as ownership stepped in to fire Thomas Frank. I think, me personally, I think that if they didn't necessarily believe in it before, they sure as hell believe in it now.
And I feel a bit like that myself, to be honest. I feel like the Newcastle game was so alarming to me. That was the first time where I genuinely thought, oh, we can actually go down. And I've not been dismissive of relegation. I've always thought that it was a threat. But I think after that Newcastle performance in particular, we were so bad against a team that are also really badly out of form. That was the first time where I felt that actually this is real.
Yeah.
And we could actually go down here. And I completely understand that. And it is a very real threat, I think. We are, if you look at all the teams below us and directly above us, we're the only team out of them with no win in the last 6 or 7 games. We've not won in 2026. So they had to go. As I said last time I was on a few weeks ago, I would have done this way earlier. I think the problem with this timing is now they don't have the January transfer window. And also they don't have, in January we had a pretty favourable, in inverted commas, run of fixtures. We didn't win any of them as it turned out. But, now we've got 12 games left, and 12 games left is not a ton of time. And like I said, we're walking on a tightrope right now. If this goes wrong, we're out. We're in the Championship. So It's life or death for Tottenham, this appointment. And hopefully the experience is what will see us through.
What I'm hoping with the rest of the way is the fact that really the only two, I guess you can call heavyweight teams that we're going to be facing is Arsenal next weekend. And then, of course, Liverpool in a couple of weeks. And outside of that, the schedule is actually very favorable with the likes of Palace and Fulham and some of these other teams that, quite honestly, are there for the taking as well, too. And I think the only thing that Igor Tudor has to do is essentially, reinstill the confidence in this club. I think what we learned after the fact, and I guess take it for what you want, take it for what you will. Secondhand reports that, for the most part, Thomas Frank was more involved in worrying about what teams were going to do instead of how we were going to set up. And from that, I think players pretty much just tuned him out. Towards the end, it was pretty much all over. And I think from that standpoint, where you have no faith in your coach, you start to question whether or not you have faith in your player, your essentially your teammates as well too. And I think really what ended up happening toward the end, I think there was potential infighting amongst the ranks, especially for players that were outside of the leadership loop. They felt like they were kind of twisted in the wind. And so, one of the things that, a guy like Igor Tudor has to do is immediately step in and bring the entire group together.
Completely. And I think, and I think if you look at the squad, I know the squad gets a really bad rep at the moment because the performances have not been good. But I think there's a lot of talent in there. It's waiting to be the shackles to come off a little bit. And you see it sometimes when we go 2-0 down under Thomas Frank. That's when the tactical plan goes out the window. And that's why, particularly in the second half against Man City and Aston Villa recently, we've looked really, really competent because the shackles are off. These guys can play. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on the formation because apparently he's quite wed to a 3-4-2-1, I think. Basically, essentially 5 wing backs, which we have seen a little bit under Thomas Frank recently, but not a lot. And it'd be interesting to see how we fit. And I think there's a couple of good things that he's played with Muani before. And in fact, Muani, when he went on that run of scoring in January last year, he was coach then. And he also knows Kulusevski and Bentancur. So there's some definitely positives to look for there, and I think what is obviously going to be true is the proof is in the pudding, and I think that it'd be interesting to see that Arsenal game is such a massive game, even without a new manager. But now it just feels like gigantic, doesn't it? And what an absolute unbelievable test for any manager to come into. And I think, to be honest, if we're deep down honesty, I think what will happen in the next games will define whether we stay up or not, and not that particular game. But I think it's a completely different outlook to it would have been if Thomas Frank was manager.
The only thing I'm concerned about going into Arsenal is the approach in which we take it. Are we just literally going to go after it? And again, what's interesting is I think the expectation of the fans have dipped so low where they'll accept a loss as long as we completely fight. You know what I mean? That's the expectation level now. It's not going there. It's not going into this fixture looking for a win. It's just like, can you hang for the entire 90? And me personally, I think those expectations are, essentially a loser's mentality. So that's what I'm looking for. I just want to see. I want to see what this team looks like for a complete 90.
Especially if you compare it to that, the Arsenal fixture previously in the season was absolutely dreadful. So it can't be any worse than that. So, and I thought in the derbies, Arsenal-Chelsea, I thought Thomas Frank would really, if you look at, for example, anybody who watched Brentford-Arsenal last night, Brentford really took it to Arsenal and maybe unlucky not to win. That's what I thought we were going to get with Thomas Frank. But in the Chelsea and Arsenal games this season, we've been absolutely woeful. And that's the word that you used there, the fight. We haven't seen any of it in those derby games. Right. And hopefully Igor Tudor, this guy has been involved in, he's been at Galatasaray, he's been at Lazio, he's been at Marseille. So if anyone's going to know about derbies, it's this man. So, if you've been in the Galatasaray derby, then I'm sure that in the North London derby, you know what to expect.
I'm curious to see what he says in his introductory press conference. Yeah. Confidence is going to be able to radiate, and people need to understand is that when a coach comes in and talks about trophies, he's not necessarily doing it for the fans. That's a byproduct, but what he's doing is signaling to his players that there is intent, that there's going to be a level of expectation and there's going to be a challenge on their hands. And that's something that I think, Thomas Frank completely failed in his introductory press conference, right? Again, players need to be challenged, not coddled. So it's going to be interesting to see what Igor Tudor, what his introductory press conference is going to look like. 100%.
Yeah, and I mean, it's easy to say with hindsight because it did end up being so bad. But in Thomas Frank's introductory press conference, he said, one thing I can guarantee you is that we're going to lose games, didn't he? That was what he said in his very first press conference. And it's easy to say in hindsight, but you can't do that. You just can't do that, I'm afraid. I know it's.
Yeah,
I know it's realism, and of course, every fan knows you are going to lose games. But the kind of precedent it sets is important. And in 12 games, this Igor Tudor has got no time at all to try and come onto these players and get their confidence and inspire them. So he's going to have to do every single thing is going to matter, like the first press conference, the first training on Monday, because the players are off at the moment, and time is of the essence. So I'm really looking forward to seeing I assume they'll drop some media today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow or Sunday. Or maybe Monday when the players are back. But it'd be interesting to see the messaging. because I imagine the way this all kind of works is they will have learned from the Thomas Frank first press conference, and they will be saying things like, you need to say that we're going to win, and all that kind of stuff.
As far as tactics are concerned, it's pretty simple. Go out there and just play your game. Right. Here's how we're going to set up. These are the expectations. But at that standpoint, there's no shackles. Where the handbrake is off. You guys have proven in your careers that you're capable of going out there and getting a win. So go out there and do it. You know what I mean? And don't worry about whether or not we're going to be exposed in the back, because we have defenders that have the pace and physicality to make sure that over the top is not going to be a problem. So go out there and just enjoy it. Enjoy your football, and take it to them. That's it. Simple. Go play football.
Exactly that. And I think, again, all of this is very easy to say in hindsight, but people were making this criticism at the time as well, is that it was very clear that Thomas Frank was way too focused on the opposition and what they're going to do. And, we've had subsequent reports that back that up as well. But I think, if you're in a club like Tottenham, a big six club, with all kinds of pressure and all kinds of responsibility and all kinds of sort of ownership. Generally speaking, unless you're playing against Arsenal, Man United, Man City, or Newcastle or Liverpool, then everyone's going to come to Tottenham and sort of generally concede possession and stuff like that. We have to impose the game on our way, and Pochettino always said that, and Ange always said that. Conte and Mourinho would have always said that. Thomas Frank didn't say that, so
nope.
I'm sure Agachuda is going to will be along the same as well.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. And of course, we are going to be talking about Mauricio Pochettino in just a little bit. But I do want to begin with this, Billy. When the news came down that Thomas Frank got the sack, and word came out that both Johan Lang and Vinny Bid Contestion were trying to decide what would be the best path, whether it's a permanent replacement or whether it would have been an interim. I absolutely got heated because it's like, what do you mean that you're deciding? Like, the writing's been on the wall for 2 months, and you could have a contingency plan in place in case shit hits the fan, right? That's what good director of footballs do, right? And it's like, it has nothing to do with a confidence loss in a guy like Thomas Frank. But it's just making sure that your bases are completely covered, because as the injury crisis continued to ramp up and numbers were lost, and the fact that he did absolutely jack shit in the January window, you probably were leading in that direction to begin with anyways, and there was no contingency plan in place. And then what's funny, 24 hours later, it kind of dawned on me, the reason why they didn't have a contingency plan in place is because both Vinny and Johan Lang had no intention of sacking Thomas Frank. Okay, none whatsoever. And so from that standpoint, it seemed like the Lewis family, whether that was I think it's the husband of Viv Lewis, or maybe it was Viv Lewis herself, stepped in and said, no. You don't seem to get it. We're part and parcel, about to be relegated, which could be catastrophic financially for this. You need to sack him. Period, point blank, end of discussion. And from that standpoint, it absolutely blew my mind, because it's rare when ownership steps in to make those type of decisions. That's why they hire these people, to make sound football decisions for the best interest of the club. And it seemed like those three were on the same page. Both Vinny Lange and Thomas Frank were on the same page. And had there been no ownership intervention, that would have continued. And if it was relegation, well, then I guess you're going to go down with the ship. But that being said, that was the reason why there was absolutely no contingent plan in place. So I guess the conversation naturally has to go to the future of these guys, because when I see it, it shows incompetence. When an ownership has to step in to make that decision, it shows utter incompetence. So I guess the logical question is, number one, do these guys look horribly bad in the eyes of ownership, to a point where maybe now they're starting to think that the road best traveled is not going to be with these two?
Short answer, yes, they have to. I mean, it's been just one incompetency after the next. And I think, if you can track it back to September, when we appointed Paratici and Langham, and then obviously the league form has been absolutely woeful. The Thomas Frank opinion has gone drastically wrong. The transfer window has gone wrong. Almost everything that these guys have touched since the Lewis family changeover has gone wrong, and on every conceivable level. Daniel Levy left, and then we had this new era. Vinay was sort of promoted, Paratici left, Lang was promoted, but since those two promotions, things have gone downhill rather than up. And I know, obviously, things take a lot of time to get better, and no one denies that. But when things are going so catastrophically wrong that Tottenham are in a genuine relegation battle, it's unforgivable. And I think what's happened in January in particular has been unforgivable, because if you're going to stick with Thomas Frank, then you've got to back him in the transfer window, sure. They didn't do that sufficiently anyway. They bought Gallagher and Sousa, which is obviously not enough in the midst of an injury crisis. Fine. Yep. And then, then they sack Thomas Frank, and then they try and hire a guy that Paratici recommended in the first place. None of it makes any sense. There's no strong leadership whatsoever. And it's just an absolute muddle and mess. And the sad thing is, rather than this time being, a disaster season, we might finish mid-table or something, we could really genuinely get relegated still. And, that would be an incomparable disaster for Tottenham. And it's been so bad under this sort of stewardship of the last 6 months or so, that we're in real danger of getting relegated. And I think anyone who has any kind of genuine, serious ideas of taking this club forward, the Lewis family, if that is what they want to do, and they keep saying that's what they want to do, and to be fair, in terms of like selling the club and stuff like that, it seems like they actually are going to stay.
Yep.
Then these two have got to go in somehow. They have to. Like they're completely incompetent, and I would very quickly get rid of both if it was down to me. I would have already got rid of. I would have got rid of them on the same day as Thomas Frank if it was up to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think is encouraging is they actually had the fortitude to step in and make that decision, right? So I understand that ENIC takes fans take a piss out of ENIC every single opportunity they absolutely can. And I know that a lot of fans were skeptical about the rebrand, ENIC 2.0. But one of the things that I will say is that, when you see these type of decisions being made, it shows that they're actually, at least on the surface, it seems like they actually care about the product in which they're trying to sell, and they understand exactly what a relegation fight or even what a relegation down to the championship will actually do to this club. And so from that standpoint, I actually give credit where credit's due. But here's the truth about it, right? There's a reason why a guy like Xavi Alonso will never come to Tottenham. Even a guy like Xavi Hernandez is because they're going to be saddled with Johan Lang. And when you look at his body of work, whether that's at Aston Villa or here at Tottenham Hotspur, he has never gone out of his way to bring in the player profile that actually meets the standard of the coach. The interesting thing is Ange Postecoglou went on to the overlap and essentially said, listen, after that first season, we got fifth. And, Daniel Levy was essentially telling them that without the Champions League, there is no kitty in which to go get players. So going into that second season, it was Dominic Solanke and 3 teenagers. After you finish fifth, the natural progression is to challenge to the top 4. And he was looking at, Mark Gahey and Semenyo and Mbemo and some of these other players, because naturally those are the next step up the ladder to contend. And Johan Lang saddles them with Dominic Solanke and 3 teenagers. And then, of course, how it unfolded, but it still ended up with a trophy. And so I get to this point where it's like, I would love Mauricio Pochettino back at Spurs, because let's be perfectly honest, the foundation of this mansion has to be rebuilt, and it has to be rebuilt accurately. But one of the things that you do not want to do is appoint a guy like Mauricio Pochettino, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that he succeeds. And saddling him with a guy like Johan Lang essentially cuffs both of his hands behind his back. Yeah, you're on mute, Billy.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think I think the Ange interview is what really sealed it for me about this guy Langer. There's no sort of competency there at all, and people forget that before he was fired from Aston Villa, he was also demoted, and he was essentially demoted in September as well. He was demoted to youth strategy and youth players. And Matt Law has come out a couple of times and said, "Well, we're still looking for another director of football." I don't ever foresee this dual director of football thing working. I think we need a fresh approach, someone else to come in, an actual director of football, and start directing the actual football. Because under Langer, there's just been nothing. There's been no direction, and I think that transfer window under Ange is a real big one, because we've just finished fifth off the back of some really horrific, 8th place finishes. We had a chance to really push on, and we signed Solanke, which you can agree is a good signing, and then we supplemented that with teenagers. It was very public that Ange wanted players like Neto and Mbeumo. Eze was linked strongly at the time. We didn't manage to deliver any of them, and I've seen, if you sort of track back through Langer's, as you said earlier, body of work, there's no star signings there. There's some good youth signings that eventually turn into good players, but there isn't like Ange used the Declan Rice example. I could never foresee a world where Langer gets a deal like Declan Rice done. Even taking out the financials of it, he doesn't seem to have that kind of salesmanship that someone like Ange has, where you can sort of convince people to do anything Ange can with the way that he talks. Langer seems to be a very sort of, cuts a very full-on figure all the time, and just not impressive at all. And, his record speaks for itself. And I think the Lewis family have seriously got to think about this guy's job. And I think, if we look at the Tudor appointment, I think it's very clear that, as we were saying off air, and, I think if it was up to a lot of fans, possibly not the American ones, then we'd have loved Pochettino to be coming there this week. But unfortunately, that's not possible. But it looks like he's coming in summer. And I can't see a world where Langer and Pochettino work together. I just can't see it. So I hope it'll be a clean break. We'll get someone else in, someone a bit more competent. And I mean, as we'll talk about later on, I'm very excited by the future of Pochettino, but I would not be as excited if Lange was still there in summer.
You would expect that Pochettino will have some provisions in order to come back, and there probably is maybe a director of football that he would like to work with, right? So you would probably assume that if Pochettino says 100%, I'm coming back, but here's the thing: a guy like Johan Lang is, I'm not going to work with that. So so you're going to have to go and get director of football X in order for me to come back. And you would probably assume that if they're serious about bringing Pochettino back, they'll do it, right? There should be absolutely no loyalty to a guy like Johan Lang, none whatsoever.
Yeah, of course. And I think everyone. I think the Tudor appointment, the fact that it's literally an interim and no one else, and there's been reports that someone like Robbie Keane, for example, Spurs were not keen to say, well, if you do a good job, you can stay permanently. I think this has been discussed as literally just being here till June and then you go.
Yeah,
I mean, if Igor Tudor wins all 12 games, then there might be a different conversation. We'll see. But I think the idea is whatever happens, he'll be gone in May unless something miraculous like that happens. But I think that would seem to suggest that they want a manager in summer, and I'm sure it doesn't take a genius to work out that there's an obvious manager that everyone wants, and in Pochettino, and it definitely looks like we're heading that way, and great. That's what we all want to do, but I think in terms of our immediate future, we can't really focus beyond that at the moment because relegation is on the line.
100%. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's not waste any time. Right, there's an old saying here in the United States, and let's not talk about the labor. Just show me the baby. Mauricio Pochettino. In your estimation, is he the right man right now for this club?
Yeah, undoubtedly, I think, for me. And I think, when you speak about Pochettino, I think Tottenham fans in particular will talk with their heart, because a lot of what Pochettino did at Tottenham is connected to the fan base and the insane connection he had with the fans, what he did, the connection that he had, the way that we played football and all that kind of stuff. And your heart might say, well, you should never really go back. Your head might say, sorry, well, you should never really go back. Looking backwards never helps you to go forwards. And, the game's moved on a lot since in those 10 years. And, some people would suggest that his record since leaving Tottenham hasn't been great. I think that's a bit harsh, because I think he did a better job at Chelsea than a lot of people suggest. And I think when he left them, they were third in the form table. And if you look at what every single Chelsea player says about him, they all absolutely adored him. You'll be able to speak a lot more on the USA job than me, but I know he's sort of turning things around a bit towards the end of it, I'm sure, which I'm sure you'll talk about in a second. But I think, if you look at our squad, I think it's made for Pochettino. I think there's so much young talent there. People like Xavi Simons and people like Tell, Odebear, Archie Gray, Bergvall. These guys need a coach like Pochettino, who is by far an incredible man manager and an incredible player developer. Cole Palmer credits Pochettino as making him as a player. Gallagher talks about him at Chelsea. One of the reasons why Gallagher wanted to leave Chelsea was because Pochettino left. These players absolutely adore Pochettino. And we saw what he did in the likes of Harry Kane. So I'm not saying we've got a Harry Kane lying dormant in the academy like we did that time, but the way that he developed and turned these players into world-class players cannot be argued. I saw a tweet yesterday saying, do Tottenham have any world-class players at the moment? I would suggest they don't. You can possibly add Romero and Van de Ven to the sort of cusp of that. But under Pochettino, we had Ali, Kane, Son, Eriksson, Toby Alderweireld, Jan Vertonghen. These players were Hugo Lloris. They were world-class players because Pochettino developed them into world-class players. And, some of the things that he did with players like Walker and Rose, who were fringe players before he came, or, had a reputation, Walker in particular, as making a lot of mistakes. This guy is one of the best player coaches you can find. So, for me, I think both heart and head both say Pochettino.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that it's no surprise that as soon as Mauricio Pochettino's name came out, then all of a sudden Spurs were linked to players like Marco Sensei of Bournemouth, and then also Christian Pulisic of AC Milan. Two guys that are absolute warriors when it comes to the pitch. Two guys that put their badge in the front and the name in the back. The interesting thing, you brought up the U.S. men's national team, and I will say that it was a struggle at first for Pochettino, because you have to understand that under our previous manager, the inmates ruled the asylum a little bit, and so from that standpoint, it was going to take time for him to reset the standards and reset the culture within that national team. And it was going to take time. Like this was never going to be something that in the first international window you were going to see it. In the United States for a good 6 to 8 months, man, they struggled. When it came to friendlies and some of our Nations League matches and things like that. And we didn't really start to see it turn until this last fall. And you really saw a buy-in from some of our biggest players, and we're starting to peak at the right time. And so from that standpoint, you can understand that, it's different from the club game where you're around players every single day, and your coaching staff has the ability to, instill the philosophy, and essentially set the standards. And so with international football these days, it's going to take time. But it looks like the United States, number one, is peaking right at the right time. And I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. actually had a pretty decent run in the World Cup. I know I'm not going to sit here and be foolish and say that my national team is going to win it. But would it surprise me if they got to a quarterfinal? Not at all, because I think the talent is there in order to do it. And I think that type of momentum is going to carry over with Pochettino.
And we saw the same, in his Premier League clubs as well. It took a little bit of time at first. Once he gets that player buy-in, if you go back to the Southampton appointment, that was massively underpopular because he took over Nigel Adkins at the time. It was doing a really good job, and he got fired. And then they brought in Pochettino, and no one had ever heard of. And he very quickly turned around that Southampton team, and obviously came to Tottenham. Struggled a little bit at first for about half of the season, and then as soon as the players got that buy-in, that was it. He sort of got rid of everyone that didn't buy in, got rid of some big characters, brought in a lot of young players, which is, you can kind of mirror to our club now. And then we didn't look back for 5-6 years and what he achieved at that time. And people always say, well, he didn't win a trophy, but he had us competing for trophies every season. And we were in league title races. We were in Champions League final, 2 cup finals under him as well. In domestic cup finals, 3 or 4 FA Cup semi-finals, whatever it was. And, this guy turned us around. So I think, this period has been so abject from anything, particularly this season. The connectivity is at an all-time low. And I think he would immediately address that.
100%. And, the interesting thing about the High Performance podcast that he was just on, you can see the relationship between him and his assistant, Jesus Perez. And I think that's, I think that relationship is absolutely vital because it is the extension to the players. And so from that standpoint, I like it. But one of the things that he said was that, night and day, he's a better manager now than he was 10 years ago. He's learned some valuable lessons in some of his shortfalls. And so from that standpoint, you're getting the best version of Poch now than you got when he left. And I think the environment is totally different now because I understand that it's hard for Spurs fans out there to believe it, but me personally, I think Enoch has a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that this team is back up where it's supposed to be. And so even if it's for the short term within a 5-year span, me personally, I kind of believe it when they say that they're going to change the weight structure. And so for a guy like Pochettino that is going to be able to take over, and as you mentioned, I love the youth on this team. I'm a big believer in a guy like Matisse Tell with the right coach, in the right system. I personally believe that he can potentially be a 15 to 20 goal scorer for this team. Same thing with a guy like Wilson Odobert. We have Mikey Moore and Luka Vuskovic out on loan that are going to come back into the fold as well as Archie Gray. And a guy like Lucas Bergvall as well too. And so really what it looks like is, from my vantage point, with the right confidence coming from a manager, with the right belief, a guy like Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall, and even a guy like Wilson Odobert can actually finally develop.
Yeah, completely. And I think, the squad, and I'm reticent to give the board the benefit of the doubt for anything, but when you look at the wage structure, you have to say it is trending upwards. There's no doubt about it. Right? We've signed Gallagher, Paulinho, obviously these a couple of loans in there as well, but Gallagher, Paulinho, Moani, Xavi Simons, and these players are all on over £100,000 a week. We've also increased Romero's contract to nearly 200,000. It is trending upwards. In fairness, I've always thought the biggest problem, and if we'd have done this under Pochettino, the sad reality is. The sad thing is, if we'd have done this, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we had Pochettino, we could have won everything. And it's, shame that in hindsight we're only starting to realize it now. But wages and someone said about when I mentioned Declan Rice, I'm not saying we need to sign a £100 million player, but you need to sign players of that caliber. And Ange said it as well in his overlap interview. When was the last time Tottenham signed someone that made you think, wow, wow? And that unfortunately comes with wages. Wages are everything for these players, and you could say, you can't get anywhere really in the next step until you start paying these players wages. So I think, imagine that sort of for Pochettino with the young squad that we've got, supplemented with some high wage players, it could be really, really exciting. And I think this is what the fans are just crying out for, because, we've asked for an ambitious football club for so long, and so far in their tenure, the Lewis family have not delivered it. And even in the new era, it's been a disaster. So a fresh start of summer, Pochettino, some young talent. But let's be honest, in the summer, we're going to need some major surgery to our team, because look where we are right now. But definitely, I think that will win a lot of fans back, because it's just really exciting.
Do you think a guy like Mickey Van de Ven resigns a long-term deal? Poch comes through the door?
Yeah. Romero also, like this guy, they will understand that Pochettino has a massive reputation as a coach, an incredible reputation for player development. They probably know, if I stick with this guy for one season, I'll see where it goes. Even someone like, players like Harry Kane and things, they will always quote about Pochettino when they talk about their development and how much he's done for them. Someone like Van de Ven, Romero, I think if we'd had a manager like Thomas Frank in summer, they'd be gone. I think there's a chance Pochettino, particularly Romero, I think is an interesting one, because obviously there's the Argentina connection there as well. And I imagine, Pochettino loves that kind of fiery player, and is very good at getting out the best of them, which we've not seen this season. And he'll probably be able to utilize Romero in a way that he can make most of his sort of temperament, and hopefully see a much more consistent Romero, who has let us down this season big time. But I would say a manager like Pochettino will suddenly make the players around feeling them like, God, I want to leave this. I want to leave this club now. People like Mattis Tell, who obviously has been widely reported he wants to go. Tell thinks, if I stick with Pochettino, this guy could turn me into one of the best wingers in the world, like he has to countless other players: Cole Palmer, Son, Eriksson. This guy he's one of the best player developed coaches. But also, I think he's just an arm around the shoulder manager as well. He's really good management skills. The squad mood will be happy. Everyone will love playing for him. I think it's a really, really exciting thing if it does happen.
I would agree. Although I would think that, Pochettino would look at a guy like Matisse Tell and develop him as a out and out target striker. That's the position that he wants to play. And I would probably assume that would end up happening. And when you talk about development, you also have to talk about positioning as well too. And just the way that Mauricio Pochettino likes his strikers to play. I think that actually is a very good fit. I think it's a very good fit.
What does he have a general formation with the US national team, or does he change it around?
He has two. He plays a high pressing, 4-2-3-1. He likes high intervention from his fullbacks as well too. But that being said, he also has been playing a 3-4-2-1 recently. To utilize the US's speed and positioning, and it's actually been incredibly successful as well too. So he has, he has multiple formations in which he likes to press out of.
And if you sort of compare it to that Tottenham, the classic Tottenham team, is it still like high pressing, and are there still Pochettino footprints of that in the USMNT now?
Without a doubt. And when you look at the speed that the US actually possesses, it fits perfectly. One of the early struggles when they were playing out of a base back four is they didn't have Harry Kane. That was the biggest difference, right? And it's like, no disrespect to our striker pool. Harry Kane.
Tottenham have got the same problem. Tottenham have got the same problem.
That's exactly right. And so from that standpoint, You had to figure out a way to make all the pieces fit, and it seems like he has figured that out. And so we'll see exactly how it moves on. But I look at this as it's weird because coming into this week, I think there was only really two places that you could turn where you really do have to take in consideration to the fan base as well too, and that was the fact that because of I guess you can say the backsliding with Ange Postecoglou, and then the turning to a guy like Thomas Frank, it literally has divided a wedge between the club and the fans. And when you look at the prices for tickets and all that factored out, you needed somebody to come in that was going to be able to unite the fan base, that was able to again rebuild the foundation, but also bring in somebody that fans could trust, that was going to be able to give them the time to potentially rebuild this club. And there was really only two names, one on an interim, one on a long-term basis. And I know this seems kind of funny, but that being said, it was Harry Redknapp on the interim, and then also Mauricio Pochettino on the long term. And of course, they didn't turn to Harry on the interim. And it's going to be, we'll find out quickly whether or not the fans are going to accept a guy like Igor Tudor. But the long term play, obviously, it feels like Mauricio Pochettino will be that guy. And so, from that standpoint, I think with the fans' knowledge of that's probably going to happen, I think fans are more apt to accept a guy like Igor Tudor in the interim.
Can I just ask you a question as well? Obviously, from your perspective, I guess a third option was perhaps more fan-led than anything else. This idea that maybe we could get Pochettino to come now. Do you think that was ever? No. Do you think that was ever a realistic opportunity? So I'm sure everyone would have done it if they could. But what about from stateside? Is that is that an impossibility?
No. Yeah, no, it was, because I think there's a few things at play. That number one, the buyout contract was so high, and it was put in there for a reason. Because I think the U.S.
Right? Apparently,
like the U.S. Soccer Federation knew that this was going to be a possibility, and they wanted to make sure that Pochettino stayed in place until after the World Cup. That's the first thing, and I don't think any club would ever put themselves in a position, to pay that, regardless of how desperate they were. There's good football business, and then there's bad football business. The other thing to consider is that it's a horrible look for a guy like Mauricio Pochettino to abandon the U.S. men's national team 3-4 months before a World Cup on their home soil, essentially letting them twist in the wind to come back to Spurs, and the damage that would do to his reputation and the respect lost. So here's the thing: like, if he did that, you can almost certainly assume that he would never have an international career ever again. There would be no international team 10 years down the road that would entrust the federation in Pochettino's hands, understanding that if a good job came along, he would just literally bolt. So his international football career would be over, and I would also assume that the lack of respect that he would show would mean that any top club around the world wouldn't do it either. And so from that standpoint, his career would ultimately die with that decision. And one of the things you cannot do is close any door if you're Mauricio Pochettino, on top of the fact that I think he actually wants to coach in the World Cup.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, I just never saw it as a realistic expectation. I know there were some fans that were saying, well, why can't he do both? And I'm like, dude, this isn't FIFA. This isn't FC 26 where you can do both. It doesn't work that way, right? Because you're not going to spread yourself thin, worrying about player development in the United States, making sure you're tracking players and making sure that they're in the right positions for the World Cup, on top of the fact that you have to worry about a relegation scrap with Tottenham. It's too much, and that was never, ever, ever going to be a reality.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression I got. I guess there was some talks that they were sort of trying to see if that was possible or not. But I mean, it's just a once in a lifetime opportunity, isn't it, to be a manager for a home nation at a World Cup? And it would have, I'm sure if there's only one club in the world that could have got Pochettino out of there, and it was Tottenham, of course, but I just feel like his reputation would have took a massive hit from everyone else that's not Tottenham, wouldn't it? And it's obviously the interesting thing would be, would Tottenham have paid it, because we are absolutely desperate, and we might have done, but it sounds like that it was never even a possibility his end, even, because it's just sort of obviously wants to manage it at a home World Cup, which is an incredible, that's something on the managerial bucket list, isn't it, for sure? And I think the idea of him doing both would be crazy as well. Just sort of, it's never going to work out, is it?
Yeah, TPT42 in the chat says, would you also not lose respect for Poch if he did? The guy is all about principles, 100%. And here's the thing: as much as I love Mauricio Pochettino, if he ended up doing something like that, I would actually lose all respect for the guy, even if he's going to my club. The fact remains, it's like there is a difference between right and wrong. And burning a bridge, especially with my national team, I would literally lose all respect for him, and that's a terrible position to be in, because quite frankly, I actually think that Mauricio Pochettino is a top class coach, and if he is the one that's burning bridges and going back on his principles, yeah, dude, that's that would just be, it would be terrible. Me personally, but all right.
And let's just imagine. Do you think this will come into play as well? Let's imagine that Tottenham we do survive, we do scrape through. Let's say as you were saying yourself at the beginning. Let's imagine that USA gets to a quarterfinal, which would be huge for them, huge for a huge achievement for Pochettino. Say they get knocked out in the quarterfinal. Do you think the fact that that's quite a lot of time for Pochettino not to be at Tottenham in the summer, and then he has to come back, and then, or do you think that not will be a factor? So, for example, if Tudor goes in June, they're still not going to be able to appoint Pochettino straight away because he's still going to be at the World Cup. Do you think that could be a factor as well, or do you think that they won't worry about that?
I wouldn't assume they're going to worry about that. Now, are you asking me, is this from a Tottenham side or a US
side? From a Tottenham side, yeah. From a Tottenham side. Could that put them
off
Pochettino a little bit, do you think?
I don't think so. And one of the things that I think Tottenham can do right now, if they really wanted to do it right now, is they sign him to a pre-contract.
I was going to say, yeah, or at least
sign him to a pre-contract
type thing, yeah.
Yeah, make sure from a Pochettino side that you inform the U.S. Soccer Federation that post World Cup you're not going to renew. And you're going back to Spurs, and is it okay if I sign a pre-contract because, quite frankly, I want to go back? Okay, cool. If you do that now and you get that out of the way, then as soon as the U.S. gets eliminated from the World Cup, he's back in North London. He's at the training facility, and he's talking to whoever his director of football is, trying to map out the 2026-2027 season as far as incomings go. The interesting thing,
those conversations could even start now, couldn't they? If they're
100%. And the interesting thing is, this just happened with the English national job. As a matter of fact, it looks like Thomas Tuchel has extended for another couple of years, and so it's impossible. It's very, very, very possible to do both. That's kind of what I want to see, because what I don't want to see is this becoming a distraction. As closer as we get to the World Cup, this is not what I want to see, because I actually think that could be a distraction that could potentially derail. And one of the biggest reasons why I want it now is because I don't want 3 weeks of negotiation after the World Cup. Time is going to be valuable in this window, because the way that it looks like is as of right now, if I'm correct, and of course you guys can correct me in the chat here, but I think there's going to be a small window that's going to open prior to the World Cup, and then it's going to shut down, and then it's going to open after the World Cup as well too. So from that standpoint, the time is going to be of the essence for Tottenham Hotspur to hit the ground running. And if you know for a fact you have your coach in play, that's going to be at Hotspur Way the day after the U.S. get knocked out. Then at that stage, it's better. It's better for everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, because obviously whoever the manager is, we're going to have it's such a massive summer for the club. And it's, massive for the Lewis family in particular, who did promise that this would be a new direction completely. So it would be great if we had some idea of who that manager is going to be, and sort of we could start, because obviously Langer, after that disastrous interview that he did a week ago today, actually, or a week ago last week, 2 weeks ago on Monday or whatever it was, Tuesday, said that we were already starting to plan for next summer. So you'd hope that Pochettino could be involved in those plans. I guess maybe it's disrespectful to Tudor if they announce Pochettino on a pre-contract, but at the same time, he knows what he's signing up for, I'm sure. So he knew what he's signing up.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the reason why they're probably not, right? I think that, number one, I think Igor Tudor understands that it is interim, but I'm sure they probably said that, there's going to be an evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, whatever, if he wins 12 games or something, then there'll have to be some kind of evaluation, right?
I don't think that's going to happen, but again, it is what it is. I want to say what's up to Spotlight on Spurs. My guy, Luke Samuels. Luke, hope you're doing well. And Luke is saying Tudor is to do. So it looks like Luke is actually quite happy with the appointment of Igor Tudor. I'm actually kind of with you right there, Luke. I actually think that of the possibilities that were out there on an interim basis, I think they got the right guy. Just from the standpoint of he's been in a relegation fight before, so he understands the situation. Now, the question that I have is, how is he going to navigate the fact that we are missing 12 first-team players and the fact that we don't have a winger available for the North London Derby? By the way, Matisse Tell is not a winger. Let's just understand that he's a striker that is playing out wide because, well, quite frankly, we don't have a winger. So I guess the natural question for you, Billy, is understanding that fact. Is there a possibility that there's potentially certain youth coming back off of loans because it's an emergency? A guy like Mikey Moore coming back from Rangers, or a guy like Yang Min Hup. Now, granted, I understand they're youngsters, but that being said, you kind of want to give Igor Tudor as many tools as possible to stay up. Or is this something where maybe he goes with a 3-4-2-1 and he doesn't necessarily have to play with wingers in his? I think his base formation is 3-4-3, but in a 3-4-2-1, you still have Xabi there. You might be able to pigeonhole a guy like Randall Colomwani in one of those spots, but I'm curious to know how you feel about this.
Yeah, I would. Don't get me wrong. In the crisis that we're in, I would love to bring Mikey Moore back. I don't think the club will do it just because it's going so well there. Yang Ming Hyuk is an interesting one because he is not playing at Coventry at all, and we could need a body. Yeah. But as Spurs diehards just put in the chat there, and hello to Spurs diehards. I think interesting is that Tynan Thompson is having a great season, so maybe that is something which we could look to. But my gut feeling is that he will go back five or 3, 4, whatever you want to call it, wing backs essentially, and our width will come from our fullbacks, which is what he has done at Juventus. And I think it's a shame because even our fullbacks are injured as well. So it's not like we have loads of bodies there either. Porro is on the verge of coming back hopefully, but Spence on the left, unless he plays Sousa, who is young and has played half an hour at the Premier League so far, then it's going to be left, which I'm not too keen on.
That's a concern as well too, because as of right now, you're looking at Archie Gray and Jed Spence as your wingbacks.
Yeah.
Or Sousa and Spence.
Or Spence and Sousa, and both of those are quite limited.
Yeah, but I think from that standpoint, you probably would roll the dice, right? You probably would take a left footer on the left side, a right footer on the right side, and just let them play. It's not exactly ideal, and you're hoping that maybe a guy like Igor Tudor is actually going to use a guy like Conor Gallagher correctly, and essentially not use him as essentially as a holding six, and you'll actually let him get up the pitch and actually work his magic in the midfield.
I think for me, that's the most exciting thing about having this new manager. I think one of Frank's biggest problems was he misprofiled so many of our players so badly.
Yeah.
People like Bergvall when he's playing them on the wing, and Gallagher has not been particularly played well. I think there's been so much misprofiling. Colomwani, And interestingly, he knows Kolo Muani really well from Juventus, so that will be slot straight in, you'd imagine. And if we go back 5, as I can see, TPT saying there in the chat, I think we're going to have to play Paulinho as a centre back, which I think he's actually looked quite good when he's played in the back 5 centre back Paulinho. So I don't have a problem with that. But I think we just badly need some fresh eyes on the squad, because I think Frank was in a terrible state of misprofiling.
Well, and it's also not just Randall Kolo Muani misprofiling, but João Palhinha's misprofiled as well too. That dude is a stay-at-home 6. He's a true definition of a holding midfielder, right? And he was actually played as a deep-lying midfielder, almost late box crasher. I think he has 6-7 goals on the season. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure we appreciate the 6 goals that he chipped in, but he's a stay-at-home 6, period, point blank. And the fact that he was playing Rodrigo Betancourt as a stay-at-home 6 with João Palhinha being that late bot crasher. And then same thing when Betancourt goes down, Conor Gallagher comes up and he just plays the exact same role.
Yeah, it was really strange. And I think the other thing, other than the misprofiling, and I guess I don't know anything about this. I'll have to go in and read a bit more, unless anyone in the chat knows. I don't know what his sort of reliance on academy players was like, because Frank did not use academy players at all. He barely even used Byfield. He used Byfield a little bit once the injury crisis got really bad. But then, we have got players in our academy. Our academy players are very highly regarded. If you look at teams like Man United and Man City, they're always mixing in academy players here and there. Man United obviously famous for having an academy player on the bench in every Premier League game for years. And every time I watch them, they always bring on the Fletcher twins and stuff in their Premier League games. And they have a couple of other academy players they rely on. And you see it at Arsenal, you see it in other top teams. Frank did not have an academy at Brentford and just not seem to trust these guys at all. And we saw with Byfield when he came on in the Premier League, in the Champions League, sorry. They're fine when you can give them a chance. If you trust them, they do absolutely fine. So I think it'd be interesting to see if we now have a manager. I don't know what Igor Tudor's like with academy players. I have no clue. But it'd be interesting to see if now there's a bit more of a shot for some of these players, because under Frank there was no pathway whatsoever, and we have got some of the most exciting academy talents in the country. So it'd be interesting to see if any of those are drawn upon now.
Adrian from Spurs Diehards TTID, what's up, Adrian? Man, hope you're doing well. Says we have a minimum of 14 games, including ECL. The 12 fit players cannot play all those games. Academy players will have to be given game time to prevent further injuries, unless injured players return. And I think in the interim, you're 100% right. The academy, whoever is going to be available, that's still within the club. You're absolutely right. There is going to have to be some use of academy players, whether we like it or not. And I guess the question is like, how are those players are going to be deployed within the confines of, the way a guy like Igor Tudor likes to play. And so from that standpoint, I would be 100% on board with it. And I guess, unfortunately, we have no other choice, because I think the next players through the door, I think, are going to be
Porro,
Kudus, Porro, Kudus, and Bergvall are probably the next 3 to come through the door.
Maybe Richarlison as well.
And Richarlison as well too. Yeah.
But the rest are all pretty much out for the season, aren't they? I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So from that standpoint, I don't think we're going to have a choice. Which is the reason why I mentioned Mikey Moore and Yang Min Huck, because at least they're wingers.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what turned it around for Pochettino, it's when he started playing the academy players for Tottenham. He brought in people like Ben Taleb, he brought in Ryan Mason, he brought in Harry Kane, and it turned our season around. So we might have to see something similar here.
You would hope. All right, so we are at the hour mark, and I do want to talk about 2 things. And so I want to talk about Thomas Frank, I guess, in a vacuum. And I also want to talk about change for Tottenham as well, too. So let's go ahead and get into it. I guess now that we put a bow on Thomas Frank, was there a moment for you when you were like, yeah, this dude isn't as advertised? Was there a moment for you where you were just like, listen, don't get me wrong, maybe I didn't think you were the right fit, but that being said, I'm going to back you because you're my manager. But there was always going to be a fine line with Thomas Frank. I said it in the summer, but that being said, for me, it was the Chelsea match. that was pretty much it for me, because that was our first home derby game with a packed house and an opportunity to, really show the fans exactly what you're made of. And he parked 10 men behind the ball the entire match. And you were just kind of like, what? And then he backed it up against Arsenal. And then, against a team like Newcastle that was struggling, he did it again. And ultimately that is, for me, was, once I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. Not at this club. It's not going to work.
For me, yeah, I mean, though that was one that I looked to as well, the Chelsea game. I think if you're being generous, you could say, well, it's his first derby. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt for that one. That was when alarm bells started to ring. When the serious alarm bells started to ring was the Arsenal game a couple of weeks later, or a week later, whatever it was. Because there was just absolutely nothing in that performance whatsoever. There was no fight. This is nothing. It was almost like we surrendered to them. And I think, that the reports have come out saying that he's such a big sort of admirer of Arsenal. We gave them way too much respect. And you've seen when teams like Brentford and Bournemouth in recent times have gone at them, they struggle. And we just sort of thought, well, we're going to have to play it. We're going to have to put 10 men on and hope we cling on for a draw. And that was a big one for me. I think the point where it became absolutely untenable was the West Ham game a few weeks ago. And I'm amazed that he's lasted this long since then. But for me, the major alarm bells have started to ring in those Chelsea and Arsenal derbies. And just another thing for me is just the press conferences like this, particularly in 2026 and the back end of 2025. Almost every press conference is coming out with just some of the most ridiculous quotes I've ever heard of any Tottenham manager. And I think what really, and the other nail in the coffin for me was the thing that he was saying about the fans and the booing thing. It became into a culture war when, a manager like or Ange or Conte or Mourinho would swat that down with one question and that would be it. With Thomas Frank, it turned into every press conference was talking about the booing. And if you saw Liam Rosenior, actually, a manager who's quite ridiculed lately, he got asked exactly the same question. What do you think about the fans booing? And he said, well, I would have booed as well because I wasn't happy with them. And I was glad that we had turned it around. If Thomas Frank had just said that a few months ago, that whole deal would be over like it is at Chelsea now, But it turned into a culture war that kept going on game after game. And it eventually ended up with the fans and players almost literally fighting on the side of the pitch. So he just had no idea how to handle a big club for me. It was way too big for a job for him. And I think we've seen in the way that Brentford are going now. And, I think the lesson learned here is you have to look at these managers that come from a really well-structured club like Brentford and Brighton and places like that, where they've got a great structure in place. You have to wonder how much is the structure and how much is the manager. I think we've seen in Brentford so far, and Thomas Frank did it.
Oh, it's the structure.
I think the structure was doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Well, as a matter of fact, I actually just saw this video that was actually quite illuminating.
I think I've seen the same one, yeah.
Under their current ownership when they were in League One, because of their structure, most of their managers that were appointed, whether they got them up or whether they got them in a playoff, in playoff qualification, most times the manager left thinking that it was the reason why they had that success was because of them, and most of them, if not all of them, that left didn't really amount to anything in their next position, and yet they were able to plug and play their next guy.
Yeah,
and continue to have that success. Like when Frank took off, they put their goalkeeper coach in, and look at where Brentford's at right now. Right, like it is the environment, it is their philosophy that has given stability, not necessarily the coach. So from that standpoint, 100%, it's the situation and the environment in which Brentford continue to cultivate. It's almost like Brighton as well too.
And Tottenham, we do not have that. We have a structure of chaos, if anything. We are not a well-structured club. We're a big club for sure. And I'm not saying it's a slight because on Thomas Frank necessarily, because very few managers in the last 20 years have been able to make a sense of it. Even some of the biggest managers in the history of the game have struggled with our structure. And I think long term, and you mentioned change for Tottenham there. I think long term, until we get that structure right, we're going to probably keep seeing the same thing that we've seen over and over again. And so a manager comes, they stay for 1 or 2 years, and they go, because the structure at Tottenham is so bereft of sort of any sort of cohesion. It's no wonder managers fail. But Thomas Frank certainly did not have the personality or the impetus to be able to deal with it. And as we've seen historically, very few managers can, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Adrian from Spurs Diehards TTID said Frank didn't adapt to a worsening situation 100%, and I agree with this as well too. one of the things that I will say is like, if you've ever seen a turtle that's threatened, and a turtle will just recede into its shell, right? They're not going to sit there and fight with anybody. They're just going to put themselves in their shell because that's their comfort area. And the thing about this is, like, every single time a major player went down with injury, Billy, he seemed to recede into his shell, and he became more conservative, and doubled down on defensive stability, to the point where what we saw against Newcastle, where Dominic Solanke was lined up essentially as a midfielder. You know what I mean? Like, you saw how 10 men were behind the ball, and you're just kind of like, huh? You know what I mean? Like, that there was, and what was interesting is when we did win the ball back, there was no flow, there was no forward passing. It was literally kick it out to the winger and then boot it upfield. And it's like, yeah, dude. Yeah.
And I think another lesson from all this is that, you know, Tottenham fans, I think Tottenham fans have this reputation of being sort of deluded, or at times, you know, expecting to see, you know, win trophies and all that. I think what we really just want to do is be entertained. We're a fan base that needs to be entertained. And Thomas Frank did not entertain us once. And, you know, the attacking football was just never really got going. We had some spells where it was okay for like 20 minutes or a second half against somebody. And usually that was when the shackles were off and we were 2-0 down or something like that. But he could never get a handle on the attacking football. And I think some fan bases just have expectations of style of play, and Tottenham are just one of them. Like, you can't make it as a Tottenham manager unless you're entertaining, I'm afraid. We need it to be entertained. And it's just, you know, it's in our DNA. If you ask, you know, grandparents and parents about the teams that they watched in the 80s, 90s, Hoddle, Ginola, Gareth Bale to a new generation. And we've always been entertaining Tottenham wherever we've been. We had to be entertaining. Harry Redknapp, Pochettino. The reason why these guys worked so well is because they were very entertaining football teams. And Thomas Frank, you can't be boring at Tottenham, I'm afraid. It's just never going to fly. Works at some clubs, never flies at Tottenham, I'm afraid.
You know, and the interesting thing was that on top of that, you know, I understand the old timers when it comes to Spurs, and some of these old time fans that will say that they're a big club, because we were at one point a very big club. We were part of the Big Five back when the Premier League broke away, due to the history of what we were able to accomplish over the decades. But I think the interesting thing was Ange Postecoglou kind of hit it right on the head, where it's like, when was the last time that this club actually made a signing where it makes fans stand back and be like, whoa, like, you know, essentially showing intent within the league. And I think he made a very astute point there. And it just goes to show you that you can be entertaining as well. But from what the heyday was with this club, back under Bill Nicholson, to where it is now, and just how far this club has slid. You know, even when you saw Harry Redknapp and Mauricio Pochettino do their things and get this team essentially knocking on the doorstep of a title, one of the biggest things that ended up happening was the fact that there was no continuation. There was no continuation at all. There was never going to be a moment where there was going to be a stick. It was always going to be a twist. And unfortunately, when you're twisting so much, you're never, ever, ever going to put yourself in a position where you can actually sit there and say that you're a Big Six club. And maybe there's some delusion within the fan base to think that we could be, up there. But let's kind of put the cards on the table right now. And I hate to be the one to say it, but we're like a good 3 to 5 years away from being that club again, which is why the foundation has to be reset. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take bravery from those that are above the manager. And everybody's going to have to be on the same page. One of the biggest problems right now is not everybody's on the same page. You have 5 different people in the executive tree that wants to see Spurs go in 5 different directions. And unfortunately, the manager gets twisted in the wind. But it is what it is. If you're not good enough, you're not good enough. And those that are making the decisions with this club are the very same reason where we're at right now. Period, point blank, full stop.
Completely. And that's why, you know, this summer is so huge. And I'm not convinced they've got the right people in place in Vinay and Langer, as we've spent talking about at
Yep.
the beginning of the show. And, I think the only positive being that you can make loads and loads of bad decisions in football, but you're only ever one good decision away from sort of, getting yourself back. And I think firing Langer, getting someone else in would be a good footballing decision. Firing Thomas Frank was a good footballing decision. I would personally also have serious question marks over Venkatesan as well, because not been impressed with anything that he's done so far since taken over. But if you sort of look at the clubs that we're sort of akin to, Aston Villa and Arsenal, maybe you could sort of, they put serious investment into the first team, both of those, and very quickly turned their fortunes around. And Arsenal have done that consistently for 7 years under Arteta. And it took the first 2 or 3 years for them to get where they are, to be even going back into the top 4. And then eventually they're, now they're in a title race year after year. Aston Villa the same, they got relegated. But they came back and they squeezed every single inch out of their PSR limit, hired Emery, which is obviously a great decision. And now they're back in sort of contention for, if not the title, then definitely Champions League football. And reality is, it doesn't matter who you've got in place, unless you put serious investment into the first team, nothing else really happens.
I would agree. Iceman 163 says, I would say probably Jurgen Klinsmann would be the last time we had a big signing, just my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know people also look to Van der Vaart, don't they? But
Van der Vaart.
That was a sort of cheap deal, so it wasn't an expensive one. But in terms of a big eye opener, then Klinsmann is definitely the last one. We haven't done it in the modern era at all.
Yeah, I think they were mentioning Gaza, and yeah. I would agree with that as well too.
Which is now like 30, 40 years ago, right? So it's crazy.
Hey man, it feels like it was just yesterday. So Billy, let's finish up with this, because I'm curious to know exactly your feelings on this. Change for Tottenham did have a protest scheduled against Manchester City, where it involved a walkout in the 70th minute. And of course, we saw what the club did in the second half of that game, to the point where there was no walkout. First and foremost, what went wrong? If there was anything wrong in the staging or the idea of it, and where is it at right now?
Sure, it's a really good question. So I think a couple of things went wrong. Firstly, I think we've learned to fans in the stadium, they want to be supporting the team. They want to be there to support the team. So organising something in terms of where you're asking them to leave is really difficult to do. And I think, people said to us that, if it was still 2-0 or 3-0, then people would have walked out. But then my reaction to that is, maybe that needs to be addressed as a situation in the first place then, because then are people walking out because of the result, or are they walking out because of the owners? And we want to make sure that any protest that we're doing isn't impacted by the result whatsoever. So walkout was probably not the right idea. The 75th minute was also probably the wrong decision, because, obviously as the game state goes on, people want to support the team. I think we were right to protest in January, because as we've seen since then, we weren't left with enough in January. And I think, I'm glad that we did that. But I think in stadium things is quite difficult to do, and certainly without a lot of promotion. I think in January, one of the things that we've learned is, we had 2 weeks between those two protests in January. And when last season we had 6 weeks in between each protest, it's really difficult to promote those protests. And obviously in January, we're sort of reacting to what's happening in January on a sort of week to week basis. Really, we need to plan longer term. So in terms of what's happening now, we are planning long term for the future. We're going to put a lot more into promotion. I think the biggest problem that we have with Change to Tottenham is we have really great support online, really great support on Twitter, really great support on YouTube from shows like this and everyone. But there's a lot of those fans in that stadium that aren't on Twitter or that aren't on watching YouTube, that their experience of Tottenham is they go with their family and they go home. They don't get involved in any of the sort of discourse. So we were upping our marketing to those kind of fans. So we're going to invest some money into things like leaflets and promotion and marketing. But we're definitely not going away. We're definitely not going away anywhere. And what we're probably going to do is, rather than we're going to look at protesting where we can promote it for a lot longer period of time than a week or 2 weeks. But having said that, I think, everything that's happened since this protest, the club has gone downhill. So we're definitely going to keep the pressure up on these owners. And I think, we were right to protest in January, because we haven't, Thomas Frank came out a week after that protest and said the squad is weaker now than it was at the beginning of January. So that's an alarm bell ringing. Obviously, Thomas Frank has been sacked. We have 12 outfield players ready for our next match. We lost 8 players. We lost 8 players in January through injury, and they didn't react to that. So we will definitely be keeping the pressure on. I think you can tell that they're feeling the pressure because obviously they've sacked the manager, and they kept saying they were never going to do that. So their pressure is on, but we've got to keep it on because this summer, as we've been speaking about in this whole hour and a bit, is a huge opportunity for this club, and they have to get it right. And they have to know that Tottenham fans, are expecting them to be ambitious as they've promised that they would be. So it's a huge opportunity. What we want to do now, we want to really, I think it's time for the Lewises now to either sell the club or put genuine investment into this first team. Those are the 2 options that they have. And if it's not going to be the first one, then we are encouraging them to sell the football club.
So, So how does the sacking of Thomas Frank come into this? Because I know that Change for Tottenham, really the underlining message was putting pressure on ENIC. And when we saw the fact that the Lewis family stepped in to override Vinay and Lang to make sure that Thomas Frank was relieved of his duties, how does that is that being discussed? You know what I mean? Because at the very least, it shows intent that they actually do not want relegation. You know what I mean? Like they're willing to override guys that they've entrusted to run this club. You know what I mean? Like me personally, I think that I actually think that shows intent. Maybe it was, longer than what you expected. But that being said, there's always that saying, right? Better late than never.
I think to be completely honest with you, it's killed a bit of momentum in terms of the anger of fans. It's bought them a little bit of time, I think. And personally, I'm at a point where I don't have any trust in ENIC or the Lewis family, and I'm sure lots of fans are like that as well. But now I think fans will be willing again to now say, okay, well, they've done something, so let's see how this plans out for the next 12 games. So it's going to be quite difficult. I think what sacking Frank has done is it's rolled the dice at least, hasn't it? And I think that's what we needed.
Yeah.
I think what it would put long term is that the people that they've put in place to make these decisions are obviously massively incompetent. The fact that they've had to step in and do it themselves, but serious question mark on Langer and Vinay, as we've spoken about in this show. So I think there. But I think in terms of after the Newcastle game, we as Change to Tottenham had an incessant fan base, like rabid anger and saying, when's the protest going to be? And then suddenly you sack Frank and that pressure, that's just the way that the game works, unfortunately. That pressure goes because now fans are thinking, and again, I will never criticize a fan, and I'm a season ticket holder. I think our focus now as a fan base has to be, well, let's get behind the team and let's stay in the Premier League until next summer. So I personally think it's bought them a little bit of time until summer. It doesn't mean that we're going to stop protesting this season, but it's certainly changed the outlook a little bit. I have to be honest and say that anger has sort of dissipated a bit now, because now people are probably thinking, well, we've got a new manager in, let's try and get behind the team and let's make sure that Tottenham don't get relegated as fans. So it's definitely changed things a little bit. But personally speaking, I have no, I'm not my sort of feeling that this summer is now absolutely massive for this football club. And I think if we don't see it, then fans are going to continue to be furious.
Me personally, I think that protests should ramp up, because ENIC has come out and said, listen, we want to wipe the slate clean. We want ambition, blah, 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 blah. Okay, cool. That's fine. I'm glad that you're saying that, but wiping the slate clean doesn't just mean removing Thomas Frank. It means removing these people from power and all their technical staff, because quite honestly, we understand that it wasn't necessarily Thomas Frank, all his fault, just like it wasn't all Ange's fault the season before last, right? There is a recruitment issue with this team. And again, I don't want Mauricio Pochettino coming back if it means that he gets saddled with Johan Lang, because it defeats the entire purpose of bringing him back in, because he's going to want a specific style of player. And then what's going to end up happening is he's going to end up, Johan Lang is going to end up finally bringing in players that actually fits Thomas Frank instead of a guy like Mauricio Pochettino. And so from that standpoint, me personally, the protests have to ramp up, because wiping the slate clean means exactly that. And the last time you were on here, man, I told you that, trying to maybe this is something that gets organized and it's for the last home match of the season or whatever the case may be. But having players walking out to an empty stadium definitely sends that message, and it sends it in a very big way, that, listen, man, this isn't just about Thomas Frank. This is about the ineptitude, the incompetence that these people have shown for our club. There's a reason why we're where we're at, and it has nothing to do necessarily with Thomas Frank. It has everything to do with the quote unquote leadership, and that leadership has to go, because clearly, just like Thomas Frank, they're in way over their head. And so if you want to wipe the slate clean, we're going to make sure that you wipe the slate clean. That's kind of where I'm at.
And that's exactly where we're at as well. We're going to, take some time to really get some planning in place, some real structures in place, promotion, marketing, sort of investment into people. And we're going to come back bigger, because I think we've learned from the January transfer window, everyone is angry, in week to week and a week to week basis of this football club, but we need to plan for the long term. So what we want to try and do is, give ourselves a bit more time, but put more behind it, so that we actually can invest in proper marketing. And let's really show these guys that unless they're going to be ambitious, unless they're going to do everything they say they was, then they really need to sell the football club now.
Yeah. That's the thing, is I don't see Nick selling the club at all.
I don't either. And if they're not going to sell the club, then they have to at some point really start taking the football seriously, because that's not something which they've done over 25 years. They said that's what they're going to do now, and they said, now Levy's gone, this is their time to shine. So let's see it in reality. And I think January transfer window, obviously, as disappointing as it was, there are some caveats you can give to it, that not many people sign players in January. I don't think that excuse washes for us, because we're in an injury crisis. But having said that, this summer is the one where they have to show themselves. They have to go really big this summer, I think. And we're not asking to go and spend 500 million and break all transfer records and go and sign someone for 100 million. We're just asking them to make good football decisions, which is what we've been lacking lately.
No, 100%. I just think there's a lot of hurdles that have to be met before they're even going to be in a position to sell. And the first step is obviously what they're going to do with Daniel Levy's 29%, whether they're actually going to buy him out and get full control of this club, or that's a convoluted conversation at the moment, as is. And then of course, there's the debt that this club the debt that this club actually carries, and whether or not that debt is going to be able to be serviced long term, and how that fits into footballing, how that fits into footballing. So from that standpoint, I would think that the immediate thing that they could do is have a massive summer. And if that is Mauricio Pochettino, fantastic. But that being said, before we get to this point, me personally, I just think the fans have to be let it known that regardless of whoever their next manager appointment is, that there has to actually be somebody in place that knows how to build a big club and also has success building a big club. And from that standpoint, a guy like Mauricio Pochettino can actually come in and succeed, because the last thing you want to do is put him in a position where his hands are tied behind his back, because quite frankly, it does nothing for this club in the long term. As a matter of fact, it might even tarnish Pochettino's legacy to be put into that type of situation. And so from that standpoint, a good football decision at this stage is making sure that these two clowns are put on gardening leave, and hopefully that they bring in somebody that actually has the CV behind him, that he's actually built a team into a trophy winning big club. And if that means you got to poach somebody from PSG or poach somebody from Barcelona or, some German giant, do it.
Completely agree. And I think, and we all are very excited about the next manager decision, but I think the director of football is the most important one, and that's the thing that they've got to focus on completely.
Yeah. All right. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. Of course, I want to thank Alan Smith and Wayne Bonner and Luke Samuels and TPT42 and all those, and Adrian from Spurs Diehards TTID. I want to thank all of you guys for participating in the chat today. I want to thank the 2,320 of you that are tuning in via YouTube and also X. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and also hit the notification bell, because tomorrow I think we're back with Dermatron, so that's going to be fun as well too. On top of Sunday, we have a massive Major League Soccer season preview with MLS Moves, so that's going to be outrageously exciting For those that are curious about if Inter Miami are going to sweep the trophy lot this year in the United States. So that's going to be absolutely fantastic. What's going on with the whistle blows, Billy? What's coming up next on the pod?
So we've got Martin Lipton coming on today to talk about, well, it was originally planned to just talk about things happen at Tottenham, and then obviously the news drops. Is going to be talking about Tudor, obviously, and then we've got a couple of Arsenal previews next week as well. Huge week for the club, right? So
Excellent.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sure we'll definitely cross paths again soon.
I would assume so, and I hope so. That's going to do it for us, Billy. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule today, man. It's always fun talking to you. By the way, the link in description for Billy's contact is in the description of this video as well too. Whether that is his X profile, Change for Tottenham, and also the Whistle Blows here on YouTube as well too. So definitely take the time to check that out. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Whistle Blows, as well as get at Billy on X as well too if you want to talk about our wonderful club, Tottenham Hotspur. So I want to thank you again. And again, thank you to all those that tuned in. It's been an absolute real pleasure, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care, guys. Enjoy your Friday. Come on, you Spurs. Dare I say in Igor Tudor we trust, Billy? Do I say it? Do I dare?